Oh, just picking up from where we left off. Actually, I went back a couple of slides just to reiterate the different models of working memory that have been proposed. So this first one was, again, the Atkinson and Shiffrin model. Information from the environment moves into sensory information. Via intention is then moved into short-term or working memory and can then be passed into long-term memory. We next looked at the Baddeley and Hitch model. Again, this one was very similar. So input from the environment moves into sensory memory. Attention is then directed to pull that information into one of three different modules that make up working memory. So the central executive, which is then passing that information to the correct coding module based on whether it's visual or auditory acoustic in nature. And again, then there's this relationship with long-term memory. Now, these first two models of memory, the Atkinson and Shiffrin model and the Baddeley and Hitch model, are often referred to as modular views or modular models in that they propose different modules, so a different working memory module from long-term memory. And this is kind of in contrast to the Cowan model, the embedded processes model, in which working memory is embedded within long-term memory. So in this figure, working memory is basically this entire weird kind of cracked egg shape, and the focus of attention is where information loads onto, information from the environment, loads onto this limited capacity focus of attention. And this is severely limited in its capacity, often to about maybe one item. Some information from this is then passed into activated long-term memory. It can even be pushed completely into long-term memory for storage in long-term memory. But the key here is that because working memory is viewed as being embedded within long-term memory, information from long-term memory is directly influencing what is being perceived in the focus of attention. So information that's loading onto the focus of attention can be connected to existing knowledge structures. So those are three dominant models of working memory that have been proposed over the years, and a lot of research on each of them. And next, just to kind of go in a slightly different direction, is what happens to working memory across the lifespan? And so I've mentioned that working memory capacity is severely limited. So we can only hold about 3 or 4 chunks, 3 or 4 bits of information in mind at a time. This capacity, however, changes across the lifespan. So it's actually quite low in young children. So in children in this figure, these are 3-year-olds, so people that are about 8 years of age. But it does increase in a kind of what's referred to as a monotonic fashion. So it increases into young adulthood. It stays pretty stable into middle age, and then it declines in older adulthood. So we can see that in this figure. It's actually illustrating proportion correct on a working memory task, but proportion correct on this task is related to how many items or how many bits of information can be held in working memory. It increases until young adulthood, and then it declines quite dramatically in older adulthood to about the same level, if not even lower than that of the youngest children. So older adults, working memory capacities are very similar to the capacity that you observed with young children. So basically, peak cognition occurs in about the 20 to 25 year age range. And then there's kind of gradual decline in cognitive capacities, working memory, long-term memory, other tasks of cognition across the lifespan, but it's particularly pronounced greater than 60 or 65 years of age. Now we can talk about some strategies to improve working memory. And so I'm going to just give you or expose to you a very quick set of letters. There's 9 letters, and your task would be to try to remember these 9 letters. So maybe you would be asked to repeat them back in the exact same order. So if I asked you to remember F-I-B-I-C-A-N-A-I, and then you had to repeat those back to me, you might have a hard time doing so. Now, if I ask you to remember the same set of 9 letters, but I've rearranged them slightly, you might find that the following is slightly easier. So I say F-B-I-C-I-A-N-I-A. Now, you might be able to connect those to things you've already seen before. So I said F-B-I, CIA, NIA. These you might liken to acronyms that of government agencies. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency. I guess NIA might be like the National Institute on Aging. So maybe that one's slightly less familiar. Nevertheless, this concept, referred to as chunking, it was a useful way to group individual items, each of the letters, into familiar structures, which would help you to remember them for a longer period of time. Whereas in the first version, in which they were presented in a random order, it's much harder to remember them. And so this is just forming groups out of the to-be-remembered items, and it's grouping them by connecting them to existing knowledge. So just to summarize our discussion on working memory, this is involved in the short-term storage of a limited amount of information. There have been multiple models that have been proposed to explain how working memory operates, each kind of successively building on the last. And although each model is unique, so we discussed 3 of these models, the Atkinson and Schifrin model, the Baddeley and Hitch model, and the Cowan model, they do all share some common properties. First, information comes in through the senses. Some attention is placed on that information, causing it to pass into working memory, or in the Cowan model, attention is already a process of working memory. And then that information can either be rehearsed or learned, which might make it easier to pass into long-term memory, or that information is forgotten. And so next time we'll discuss long-term memory, encoding and retrieval processes. So see you all then.